Hi there, I'm Bob from Bob Lad Brewery, and today I'm going to talk to you about making beer using the all grain method. So I'm going to go first, I'll go through some of the ingredients, then we'll do a little bit of the equipment, and then hopefully, if the weather stays off, we'll make a brew. Okay, so what do you need for making beer? Well, you need 4 ingredients. You need water, you need grain, you need hops, and you need yeast. So only 4 ingredients that you need to make beer. You can add other things in, but those are the 4 main ingredients. And when you've done all that, you get this stuff here, which is beer. It's only a small glass, so I don't want to start talking daft later on. Okay, let's go through each of the ingredients in turn. Home brewing, water, straight from the tap, no problem. Brewed for 4 or 5 years, never had a problem with the water. All I would say is that if you drink water and you're tasting it and it tastes okay, it hasn't got too much fluoride in it, it's perfectly acceptable to use. You can alter the water so it's got some other additives into it, so it makes it easier to taste. But at the moment I've never actually used anything other than tap water. Important, grain. And what this is malted barley which has been cracked open as if you were making flour, except you're not making flour, you're just cracking open the grains. Now when I say malted barley, what I mean is that you get the barley from the crop, you lay out over a malting floor, you wait until just before germination, and then you dry the barley out, and then you put it through a mill and crack it. Now all this is done for you if you're buying grain from your local or homebrew shop, or you're buying your grain online. It's all done for you. It's just called malted. There are other things you can put in there other than barley. In this recipe I put a little bit of malted wheat in, but as I say, barley is your main ingredient. Now the reason why you're cracking the grains is that you're going to crack the grains so you can extract the sugar that's inside those grains, and that will make your beer. The other thing we need is hops. Now hops do a couple of things. The first thing they'll do is they'll add a little bit of bitterness to your beer, and then they'll also add aroma to your beer and a taste to your beer. And that's why all beers are different. You're using different grains and you're using different hops, and the recipe that we'll be brewing later on, I'll tell you all about the hops which I'm going to put in that. And of course you need yeast, and what the yeast does, it converts all those sugars into alcohol. Okay, so if you're brewing an all grain brew from scratch and you've never done it before, what I suggest you do is you actually go to a recipe that's already been proven. That way you'll be able to get your brew against the tasting notes of the brew that's already been done, and then you'll have a better comparison. If you make your own brew from scratch with your own recipe, then you don't know exactly what it's going to be turning out like. I suggest you do that sort of your second, third, fourth brew or something like that. But as I say, I've been brewing for 4 or 5 years now, and I've made all different types of brews, from porters all the way up to New England pale ales. Okay. The thing about your grain and your water is that you need to balance those two the right way, really, correctly, really. So for instance, if you've got a high grain bill compared to the amount of beer that you're making, then you will have a stronger beer. Conversely, the less grain bill, you'll have a weaker beer. Now I tend to brew around about 4 to 5% my beers, okay, and then that grain bill will be sort of like around about 5, maybe 6 kilograms of grain. The grain is important. You usually use a mixture of different grains. Not all the time, you can use just one single grain, but usually you're mixing grains together. And again, once again, when we get the recipe later on, I'll put the recipe up online. You can see what the different grains that we're using. It also goes with the hops as well. The hops come from all over the world. The ones we'll be using today are mainly American hops, because we're making an American style of beer, like well, not a Budweiser, don't get me wrong, don't be supping out like that. This is like an American pale ale. It's going to be quite floral, it's going to be quite hoppy, and it won't be over bittered. And that's, when we brew, we'll go through that. Okay. So some of the other things that you'll need while you're brewing, apart from your brewing equipment, of course, is the most important thing is sterilisation. You need to sterilise all your equipment so that it's perfectly clean. Any dirt in there is going to ruin your beer, and that's what you don't want. There's two methods here. This is like Star San or Chem San. Beauty of this one is that you can wash all your equipment out, and if you've got any suds in there, you can still brew. It's what they call a no rinse cleanser, and this one here is quite common. VWP cleanser. It's powdered form. You do have to wash your equipment out afterwards as well. So the most important thing on everything that you do is it's got to be clean, right the way from your brewing down to bottling. Other thing you'll need is a paddle. Okay, that's so you can dough in all your grains into your water, and again we'll go through all that later on. Thermometer to check the temperature. I've got a normal thermometer. You can use a digital thermometer. It doesn't make a lot of difference and what have you. It's just that I've had this and I've been using it. Later on I will be using a digital thermometer, but when you see how I'm brewing as well, there's a thermometer already in the brewing process, so it's not too bad, not too bad. And another important thing you'll need is you'll need a hydrometer, and you'll need a measuring jug and what have you. And your hydrometer, what you do is you take your hydrometer reading straight after you've boiled your beer before you actually ferment, and then you check it again after fermentation, and that will give you the strength of your beer. If you are going to be brewing from a recipe or from your own recipe, you really should be using an application on a laptop or sometimes on your phones that gives you all the strength of your beer before you even start. Now, there's a couple of them that are out there. Beersmith is quite popular, and the one I'll be using is the Grainfather app, because I'll be using a Grainfather brewer. And both of those will tell you the approximate strength of your beer, what the colour of your beer is going to be. It'll give you your volumes of your water that you'll be using to make the amount that you want to get at the end. So if you're brewing a 21 litre brewing process, you want 21 litres of beer, you'd have to increase your water content to allow for the water going into the grains, and the water boiling off, and any water which is left with your hops and things like that. So you'll need to these apps, they'll tell you how much water to be able to put in. You can always add a little bit of hot water later on during your process if you think that you've not quite got it right. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be much more than a litre out, which is a pint and a half. Right. The difference between an all grain process and using a malt extract is time. First of all, you're using a different process. It's a lot longer using the all grain than it is to using your malted extract that you get from a kit. The problem with the kit is that you're stuck with that one brew. You don't often be able to change it. You might be able to put some hops in there, but with your all grain method you can alter strength, you can alter your grain bill, and it will give you a different. If you've got a beer, you say, I could just do a little bit more hops in there, or I could do it being a little bit weaker, it's a little bit strong, then you can alter your grains accordingly. With your malted extract, you haven't much opportunity to be able to do that. Okay, so I've shown you some of the stuff here. I'm going to get rid of all this lot here, and then we'll stick the brewing equipment that I use on, and then we'll start a brew. Okay, hopefully the rain will stay off today. I'm actually under cover here, but the camera isn't, so I can't let the camera get wet. But we'll do a brew process. How long does it take? Well, let's say 5 hours from start to finish. At the moment I've got what they call a strike water heating up to the temperature that I want. So once I've got rid of this, it should be somewhere near anyway, and then we'll go through the brew. Rock on! Okay, so we're on to the brewing process now. So the system which I use is what they call a Grainfather. It's not quite an all-in-one brewing system. I'll explain that to you again shortly, but it's a very good system. It's relatively expensive for what it does, but I've been using it for about 4 years now, and I've never had a problem with it. It's great. It does everything I want it to do, and I've done quite a few brews on this one. What it does, what it's got an inner cylinder here, okay, and that's where I'm going to be putting all the grain for the mash. At the moment, what I've done is I've put in there what they call the strike water. That's the water which we're going to be using for what they call the mash process. The mash process being when we actually add the grain into the water, stir it up, keep it at a constant temperature, in this case 65 degrees, for 60 minutes, and that will extract all those sugars, or most of those sugars, out of that grain. Okay, and then we can start to go to the next part of the brewing process. So in the moment I've got nearly 15 litres of water in there. Some people call it liquor, if brewers call it liquor, but it's actually water. And I'm going to be adding the whole of the grain bill. I think the grain bill works out something like 4.1 kilograms. Now what I've done is that I've mixed all the grain together, and I shall be adding that in, or doughing that in, using a paddle. Okay, now a paddle, I've actually got one which is sterilised. I'm taking out the steriliser here now, and I'm going to be putting all that grain in there. So here we go. So the first thing we do is we add a little bit at a time. Give it a right good stir in. It's important that we get all the grains soaked. A bit more. Ideally 2 people should be doing this, one stirring, one adding the grain slowly, but there's only me here. Oh, well, me and the dog, and the dog isn't very good. Okay. So what we're trying to make here is a porridge, a lovely porridge, a porridge that makes beer. What you're trying to avoid here is little dough balls of grain that don't get any of the water around it. Because if you don't get any water around the grain, then it won't extract any of the sugars, and you get a weaker beer. It's getting a bit thicker now. You should be doing this in takes a good few minutes to do this. Keep going down to the bottom, pulling that grain up. The last bit going in. And this is when it gets a little bit difficult. Now, they're mentioning the Grainfather here. The beauty of the Grainfather is that they've got a controller here at the front. That controls all the temperature and the brewing process. And I can control that with an app on my phone. So once I've created the recipe, all I need to do is load it into my phone and I can brew from that recipe, which is great. So the strike water was at 65 degrees. I've added the grain in now. Sometimes if your grain's a little bit cold, the temperature might drop, but the heating will get all those grains all up there. Get them all wet. Okay, I'm quite happy with that now. So I'm just going to take this little cap off here, which is just a bit of tin foil. That stops the grain from going down the tube in the middle. Okay, so the next bit I have to do, and I've just misplaced it, is put the strainer plate on the top, stopping the grains from going down the middle. Give me 1 second. This is the strainer plate that goes down on there. Try and get it into the centre of that tube. Push it down until it just and so rests on the top of the grain. Put down the overflow tube down there. And then we need to add on an arm for the pump. I'll put the arm on here now. And here's the foam. It said it's 64 degrees and it's heating up. So I'm going to start the mash there now. Okay. And now the pump's working now. And what it's doing, it's circulating the water, the liquor, through that grain, and it's going to get all those sugars out, or most of those sugars out of there. Now this takes an hour. It's an hour at 65 degrees. You've got to keep that temperature relatively constant, within a degree. If it's not the right temperature, this system will heat it up to the right temperature. After an hour, we're going to heat it up to 75 degrees. And we're going to call it the second mash process. This is the first mash process. The second mash process will be fixing the enzymes in the beer at 75 degrees. But for the moment, I've got an hour where I'm not going to be doing very much, apart from doing the next stage, which should be called the sparge water. Now, I mentioned before that I'm going to do a 21 litre brew, and I only put 15 litres of water inside the mash tun. Basically, that's so you get this porridge mixture. What we're going to be doing after we've done this, after we've gone through the second mash process, I will be straining water through that grain to wash all the sugars out, to get the sugars into the beer at the bottom, by using what they call sparge water, using a sparge method. Now what that does, you just lift this basket will lift straight out, rest on the top. All the liquid will then drain into the bottom. I'll then start to heat it up to its next temperature, which is the boiling temperature. And whilst it's heating up, I will be about a litre at a time. I will be pouring sparge water on the top of the plate at the top, and that will drain, that will go all the way through the grain and wash those grains out, get all that sugar out of those grains. So for the time being, I'm just stuck here now for an hour for doing nothing apart from setting the sparge water going, and I think I'll do that with my sparge bucket there. I don't really need to do it for another half an hour, but I'll get it going now, and I'll make sure that temperature for the sparge water is also at 75 degrees. Okay, so that when we get there, it's going to start the boil process. Okay. Okay, any second now we're going to be starting the next process, which is called sparging. Now I've got the mash tun here with all the grain in it. That's been mashing for about an hour now at 65 degrees. It's raised its temperature up to 75 degrees and it's what they call mashing out at 75 degrees. I've got my sparge water here. And I'll show you what we're doing that in a second now. And the temperature of the sparge water is 74 degrees, so that's not too bad. That's okay. So any second now, when a little beeper goes, because it's all controlled from my phone over there, I shall be able to start sparging. Now, the equipment that we've got here is quite sort of, I say it's not expensive, but it's a bit more expensive if it's just starting out. You can do all this relatively cheaply, really, and I started out using a cool box, which is what I used for my mashing process, and then got a stainless steel boiler where I could boil up the sparge water and then boil up the boiled water, boil up the water and what have you, the beer at the end. So you don't need to go to the whole expense of getting all this equipment. Anyhow, the beeper's going, so off we go. I'll just go to the next bit. The pump stopped. I'll take off the pump arm. Put that to one side. Now I'm lifting the grain basket out. All the water now is draining through the grains, and I've got about 10 millimetres there of height, so it's just slowly going through. Just going to check one thing. So once that's started to drain through, I'm now sparging, so I'm just about a litre of water at a time, just on top of a little plate, a perforated plate which is on top of the grain. That's going to start washing all that grain through and start to sort of get all the sugars we can possibly get out of there. Not bad sparging process, this one. It's a little bit quick. It should take quite a while to do it. The idea of the plate on the top, it stops. It makes sure the sparge water is evenly spread at the top of the grain. So whilst I'm doing that, I'm now going to set it to go to boil. I can do it on the front of here. So we're now setting it to boil. So whilst it's going through, it's heating up from 75 degrees to 100 degrees C, ready for the next process, which is, well, I'll be adding the hops. Nice and clear, that, nice and clear. Okay, so this is the mashing part. This will be, once I've done the sparging, I'll be able to take this away. A little tip for you, if you want to speed your brewing process up, do your cleaning as you go along. So once all that grain's been washed through with the sparge water, I'll start washing this ready for the next brew. But it's going through very, very quickly. It's a bit too quick, really. Should be spending about 15 to 20 minutes, but I can't help it. That's the way it is. Now, I mentioned before the grain bill, and I'll tell you what grains we've got in here. We've got Maris Otter or Golden Promise. I've got 3.75 kilograms of that. Just keep on doing this. and I've got Carapils 0.15 kilograms, light crystal malt 0.1 kilogram, and something called torrefied wheat at 0.2 kilograms. And what torrefied wheat is, it's a wheat that's been up to a high temperature and then split, so you can get some of the sweetness out of the grain. It's not a malted grain. You change that for a malted wheat if you wanted to, but it's, in this case, the recipe I've had is to put torrefied wheat in. This is going rather well. And here you can hear it just dribbling away into the boiler at the bottom. As we're speaking, it's now heating that water up, ready for the next process. The trouble is we need to get it up to that 100 degrees temperature so we can start to boil. And sometimes it can take quite a while. Little tip, if you don't, I'm about sea level here, just very close to sea level that we are here, so 100 degrees is what we're aiming for. If you're above sea level, quite high above sea level, and then that temperature will start to boil a little bit lower due to pressure, so don't worry about that. Don't worry too much about that. This is rather quick doing this. I'm a bit disappointed it's this quick, but we'll see. We'll still get beer, won't we? We'll still have a brew out of it. I did mention before about some of the ancillary equipment that you'll need. What you see, I didn't mention the fact that you need a set of accurate weighing scales. Kitchen scales, but accurate ones, because you'll be measuring down to grams, especially when you get down to the things like the hops and what have you. Here we go, last bit of sparge water going in. There we go, that's the last bit of sparge water going in. Heated up to 85 degrees now, we're getting to 100 degrees, and then the next process will come along. So for now, I'll civvy. Okay, so we've got up to temperature now, we're up to 100 degrees C. Get that going, okay. 100 degrees C, now it's time for the very first hop edition. Now there are 4 hop editions to this brew. The first edition is 15 grams of mosaic hops at the full 60-minute boil. This is the first time I've ever used this. This has got a hop called a hop spider. So the hops into the hop spider, into the boil. Give them a little stir in there. The hop spider's there to separate the hops from the beer, which is now called wort, so it's not getting clogged in the filter at the bottom when we start to pump beer through. Now I'll show you what a hop looks like. Get a flower out. They're dried hops, and it's important that you keep these hops when you're storing them out of light, and I usually freeze mine. So got a little hot flower here. Oh, that's hot. So not right good bear, but that's a hop flower, and that contains what they call alpha acids, and the alpha acids create the bitterness into the beer. Now these are mosaic hops, these are American style hops, so it's an American style beer I'm doing. You can also get these hops in pellet form. No problem in getting it in pellet form as opposed to leaf form. They both do just the same job. The only trouble with pellet form is that you tend to get a mush in the bottom of your boiler at the end of the brew. Whereas these, you can actually see them and scoop them out. But this one, I'll be able to just pull this out with the hop spider. Okay, so that's going to lay in there and get them boil through. The second hop addition is at 10 minutes before the end of the boil, and there's a mixture of two separate hops in there. We've got Citra and I think Centennial. We'll have a look again in a minute. So I'll get those hops ready for the next hop addition. And then there's what they call a hop stand at the end of the boil, where we will leave the hops in. Again, another set of hops. We'll put those in just to get the aromas of those hops into the beer. That's a third addition of hops. And then after we'll start the fermentation after that. So I'll show you how that's done later on. And during the fermentation process, after it's started fermenting, after about 2 or 3 days, we'll put in another hop addition, and that's what they call dry hopping. So dry hopping is just basically you're putting it into the wort whilst it's fermenting. Okay, so this is now bubbling nicely. It's got another 54 minutes to go. The only other thing which I'm going to do is I'm going to sterilise what they call the wort chiller. Now the chiller that we've got is what they call a counterflow chiller. So I'll just get that ready for us now. Okay, so this goes on the top. Unfortunately, it could start foaming there. Put the chiller there. That's the inlet. This is the outlet. I'm going to put this back into the beer, the wort, and I'm going to set the pump going. Unfortunately, when we do this, what happens is the counterflow chiller, with it being cold, will cool the wort down, so it'll have to get back up to boiling temperature. But if I do it now, I've got a lot more time. I've got less time at the end of the brew than I have now. So this isn't going to be too bad. Yep, it's going through now, nicely now. And the temperature has dropped. Oh no, it's still at 100 degrees. It will drop. I know it will drop. What happens with the counterflow chiller is that once we've done the brewing process, or we should say the boiling process, and the hop stand, what we'll do is we will connect the cold water supply to this end. The hot water out is at this end here, and as the cold water goes one way, that's from the bottom up, the hot water comes out of the boiler the opposite way, and you get a heat exchange, and hopefully it'll come out at the temperature where I can actually pitch my yeast at. But I don't need to do that yet, obviously. I'm just going to give that a sterilisation. Now, everything up to now we have said about cleanliness. When you're boiling, you're going to be cleaning it anyway. It's the next part of the process where we have to be super clean and sterile. It was all sterile before, but at this moment in time, we're boiling, so the boiling does actually do a bit of sterilisation. But the next bit is when you go into the fermenter, which is this bit down here. I've also added another temperature controller inside the wort there, but I'll check it out in a minute. Sorry, when we get into the fermenter and what have you, so we've got to get it down to that temperature quickly. Right, for the time being now, I can go and have my pie for the next 45 minutes. I should be okay. So my next hop addition is around about 10 minutes before the end of the boil, and I'll tell you then what the hops are. So absolutely spot on. Here we go. Okay, so we're down to the last 10 minutes of the boil. It's time for the second hop addition, which in this case is Cascade 17 grams. So 17 grams of Cascade are going in. Get it soaked in. this is going to give a little bit more bitterness, but you're going to get more aroma from the hops that are in there. Okay. So this is the second edition, like I said. There is a third edition, and the third edition of the hops is what we call a hop stand. So in 10 minutes time I'll turn the heat off. Well, the heat will turn off automatically because it's an app. The heat will go off, and I will add have a quick look, 16 grams of Citra hops and 19 grams of Cascade hops, and I will let them sit in there for 30 minutes. Okay, I'm not going to actually show you what I'm doing in there because it's just the same as what I've just done now, actually, really. So I'll let them sit in there for 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes what we'll be doing then is we'll then be pumping out all the wort into the fermenter, which is here, at a lower temperature. So we'll be using the counterflow chiller. Of course, with that 30-minute period, the wort's going to be cooling down a little bit more anyway. But yeah, so once again, for the time being, rock on. We'll see you shortly. Okay, that's been a hop stand now for 30 minutes. Now it's time to cool all that wort down into the fermentation temperature. So here's my counterflow chiller. We have wort coming out here, cold water in, hot water out, everything's going okay. Just a little bit about the fermenter I've got here. It's a conical fermenter. So when the yeast is all done, it all drops down to the bottom, and I can reuse that yeast again. So I'll just let it carry on like this for the next one till it's drained out. Then I'll aerate it. I'll get as much air into that as possible. Check the temperature, which I've got a temperature gauge down here. Once it hits the level, and then we'll be able to control the temperature by this heater band here, the temperature controller. I will be able to ferment out for 7 to 10 days. Now I think I'll do it for 10 days. During that process I will be doing what they call dry hopping, and that means I'll be putting just hops into the fermenter after about 3 or 4 days for 5 days. That's going to give me more aroma of hops and juiciness in the beer. So for the time being, I've finished and what have you, and then I'll come back to you shortly. Thank you very much. Now rock on. Hello again. Finished brewing now. Everything's in the fermenter. I've taken a reading with the hydrometer here, and I was a little bit a point away from what I wanted it to. 1.039 was the original gravity, and I'll check the final gravity at the end of the fermentation process, which will take 10 days. In that 10 days I will have a dry hop of about 4 days with the rest of the hops. Hopefully I've put the recipe on. You can have a look at the recipe, brew it yourself if you want. All it needs for me to say to you now is thank you very much for watching. I hope it's either inspired you to brewing or give you a little bit of an insight into how I brew, and you get this stuff again, beer again. This one is an earlier one, a bit like Blue Peter. Here's one I brewed earlier. This one's called Trafalgar because it's got Nelson Sauvin hops in it. So bottoms up.